Hello and welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin. This is chapter 20 of Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Now, if you're new here, I do these live. These are my live, audiobook recordings, and then I edit them into audiobooks, edit out the this kind of thing, the sidebar conversations, the throat clears, the coughs, the sips of water or coffee, and then I put it back on the Cultured Bumpkin as an audiobook. So, I hope that if you like audiobooks, you've come to the right place. I love classic literature. I love audiobooks. Let's get cracking. All right. Chapter 20 The Ogre's Castle. Between 6 and 9, we made 10 miles, which was plenty for a horse carrying triple, man, woman, and armor. Then we stopped for a long nooning under some trees by a limpid brook. Right so came by and by a knight riding, and as he drew near he made dolorous moan, and by the words of it I perceived that he was cursing and swearing. Yet nevertheless I was glad of his coming, for that I saw he bore a bulletin board whereon in letters all shining of gold was writ, Use Peterson S. Prophylactic Toothbrush all the go. I was glad of his coming, for even by this token I knew him for a knight of mine. It was Sir Madoc de la Montaigne, a burly great fellow whose chief distinction was that he had come within an ace of sending Sir Launcelot down over his horsetail once. He was never long in a stranger's presence without finding some pretext or other to let out that great fact. But there was another great fact of nearly the same size which he never pushed upon anybody unasked, and yet never withheld when asked. That was that the reason he didn't quite succeed was that he was interrupted and sent down over horsetail himself. This innocent, vast lubber did not see any particular difference between the two facts. I liked him, for he was earnest in his work and very valuable, and he was so fine to look at, with his broad mailed shoulders and the grand leonine set of his plumed head and his big shield with its quaint device of a gauntleted hand clutching a prophylactic toothbrush with motto, Try, no you don't. This was a toothwash that I was introducing. This was a toothwash that I was introducing. He was aweary, he said, and indeed he looked it, but he would not alight. He said he was after the stove polish man, and with this he broke out cursing and swearing anew. The bulletin boarder referred to this was Sir Osace of Surluce, a brave knight and of considerable celebrity on account of his having tried conclusions in a tournament once with no less a mogul than Sir Gaheris himself, though not successfully. He was of a light and laughing disposition, and to him nothing in this world was serious. It was for this reason that I had chosen him to work up a stove polish sediment. There were no stoves yet, and so there could be nothing serious about stove polish. All that the agent needed all that the agent needed to do was to deftly and by degrees prepare the public for the great change and have them established in preledictions toward neatness against the time when the stove should appear upon the stage. Sir Madoc was very bitter and brake out anew with cursings. He said he had cursed his soul to rags, and yet he would not get down from his horse, neither would he take any rest or listen to any comfort until he should have found Sir Alsace and settled this account. It appeared, by what I could piece together of the unprofaned fragments of his statement, that he had chanced upon Sir Osace at dawn of the morning, and had been told if he would make a short cut across the fields and swamps and broken hills and glades, he would head off a company of travelers who would he could head off a company of travelers who would be rare customers for prophylactics and toothwash. With characteristic zeal, Sir Madoc had plunged away at once upon this quest, and after 3 hours of awful cross-lot riding had overhauled his game. And behold, it was the 5 patriarchs that had been released from the dungeons the evening before. Poor old creatures. It was all of 20 years since any one of them had known what it was to be equipped with any remaining snag of remnant it was all of 20 years since any one of them had known what it was to be equipped with any remaining snag or remnant of a tooth. Blank, blank, blank him, said Madoc. And I don't, And I do not stove polish him, and I may find him, leave it to me. For never no night at the height, for never no night that height o' sace, or aught else, may do to me this disservice and bide on live. And I may find him, the which I have thereunto sworn a great oath this day. And with these words and others, he lightly took his spear and gat him thence. In the middle of the afternoon, we came upon one of those very patriarchs ourselves, on the edge of a poor village. He was basking in the love of relatives and friends whom he had not seen for 50 years, and about him and caressing him were also descendants of his own body whom he had never seen at all till now. But to him these were all strangers. His memory was gone, his mind was stagnant. It seemed incredible that a man could outlast half a century shut up in a dark hole like a rat, but here were his old wife and some old comrades to testify to it. They could remember him as he was in the freshness and strength of his young manhood, when he kissed his child and delivered it to his mother's hands and went away into that long oblivion. The people at the castle could not tell within a half generation the length of time the man had been shut up there for his unrecorded and forgotten offense. But his old wife knew, and so did her old child, who stood there among her married sons and daughters, trying to realize a father who had been to her a name, a thought, a formless image, a tradition all her life, and now was suddenly concreted into actual flesh and blood and set before her face. It was a curious situation. Yet it is not on that account that I have made room for it here, but on account of a thing which seemed to me still more curious. Quick water break. Good evening if you're watching this live, and good evening or good day if you're watching the replay. All right, okay. To wit, that this dreadful matter brought from these downtrodden people no outburst of rage against these oppressors. They had been heritors and subjects of cruelty and outrage so long that nothing could have startled them but a kindness. Yet here was a curious revelation, indeed, of the depth to which this people had been sunk in slavery. Their entire being was reduced to a monotonous dead level of patience, resignation, dumb, uncomplaining acceptance of whatever might befall them in this life. Their very imagination was dead. When you can say that of a man, he has struck bottom, I reckon. There's no lower deep for him. I rather wished I had gone some other road. This was not the sort of experience for a statesman to encounter who was planning out a peaceful revolution in his mind, for it could not help bringing up the unforgettable fact that for it could not help bringing up the unforgettable fact that all gentle cant and philosophizing all gentle cant and philosophizing to the contrary notwithstanding, no people in the world ever did achieve their freedom by goody-goody talk and moral suasion, it being immutable law that all revolutions that will succeed must begin in blood, whatever may answer afterward. If history teaches anything, it teaches that. What this folk needed then was a reign of terror and a guillotine, and I was the wrong man for 'em. 2 days later, toward noon, Sandy began to show signs of excitement and feverish expectancy. She said we were approaching the ogre's castle. I was surprised into an uncomfortable shock. The object of our quest had been the object the object of our quest had gradually dropped out of my mind. This sudden resurrection of it made it seem quite a real and startling thing for a moment, and roused up in me a smart interest. Sandy's excitement increased every moment, and so did mine, for that sort of thing is catching. My heart got to thumping. You can't reason with your heart. It has its own laws and thumps about things which the intellect scorns. Presently, when Sandy slid from the horse, motioned me to stop, and went creeping stealthily, with her head bent nearly to her knees, toward a row of bushes that bordered a declivity, the thumpings grew stronger and quicker, and they kept it up while she was gaining her ambush and getting her glimpse over the declivity, and also while I was creeping to her side on my knees. Her eyes were burning now, and she pointed with her finger and said in a panting whisper, "The castle, the castle! Lo, where it looms!" "What a welcome disappointment I experienced," I said. "Castle? It's nothing but a pigsty with a wattled fence around it." "Oh, what a welcome disappointment I experienced." I said, "Castle? It's nothing but a pigsty with a wattled fence around it." She looked surprised and distressed. The animation faded out of her face, and during many moments she was lost in thought and silent. Then, "It was not enchanted aforetime," she said in a musing fashion, as if to herself. "And how strange is this marvel, and how awful, that to one perce- that to the one perception it's enchanted and dight in a base and a shameful aspect, yet to the perception of the other it's not enchanted, hath suffered no change, but stands firm and stately still, girt with its moat and waving its banners in the blue air from its towers. And God shield us, how it pricks the heart to see again these gracious captives, and the sorrow deepened in their sweet faces. We've tarried long and are to blame." I saw my cue. The castle was enchanted to me, not to her. It would be wasted time to try to argue her out of her It would be wasted time to try to argue her out of her delusion. It couldn't be done. I must just humor it. I said, "This is a common case. The enchanting of a thing to one eye and leaving it to its proper form to another. You've heard of it before, Sandy, though you haven't happened to experience it. But no harm is done. In fact, it's lucky the way it is. If these ladies were hogs to everybody and to themselves, it would be necessary to break the enchantment that might be impossible if one failed to find out the particular process of the enchantment, and hazardous too. For in attempting a disenchantment without the true key, you are liable to err and turn your hogs into dogs, and the dogs into cats, and the cats into rats, and so on, and by the end, reducing your materials to nothing finally, or to an odorless gas which you can't follow, which of course amounts to the same thing. But here, by good luck, no one's eyes but mine are under the enchantment, and so it is of no consequence to dissolve it. These ladies remain ladies to you, and to themselves, and everybody else, and at the same time they will suffer in no way from my delusion, for when I know what an os- for when I know that an ostensible hog is a lady, that is enough for me. I know how to treat her." "Thanks, O sweet my lord, thou talkest like an angel, and I know thou wilt deliver them, for that thou art minded to great deeds, and art as strong a knight of your hands, and as brave to will and to do as any that is on live. I will not leave a princess in the sty, Sandy. Are those three yonder that to my disordered eyes are starveling swineherds? The ogres, are they changed also? It's most wonderful. Now I'm fearful, for how canst thou strike with sure aim when 5 of their 9 cubits of stature are to thee invisible? Oh, go warily, fair sir. This is a mightier enterprise than I wend." "You be easy, Sandy. All I need to know is how much of an ogre is invisible. Then I know how to locate his vitals. Don't you be afraid. I'll make short work of these bunco steerers. Stay where you are." I left Sandy kneeling there, corpse-faced but plucky and hopeful, and rode down to the pigsty and struck up a trade with the swineherds. I won their gratitude by buying out all the hogs at the lump sum of 16 pennies, which was rather above latest quotations. I was just in time, for the church, the lord of the manor, and the rest of the tax gatherers would have been along next day and swept off pretty much all the stock, leaving the swineherds very short of hogs and Sandy out of princesses. But now the tax people could be paid in cash, and there would be a stake left besides. One of the men had 10 children, and he said that year when a priest came and took his 10 pigs, and of his 10 pigs took the fattest one for tithes, the wife burst out upon him and offered him a child, and said, "Thou beast without bowels of mercy, why leave me my child, yet rob me of the wherewithal to feed it?" How curious. The same thing had happened in Wales of my day under this same old established church, which was supposed by many to have changed its nature when it changed its disguise. I sent the 3 men away, and then opened the sty gate and beckoned Sandy to come, which she did, and not leisurely, but with the rush of a prairie fire. And when I saw her fling herself upon those hogs with tears of joy running down her cheeks, and strain them to her heart, and kiss them and caress them, and call them reverently by grand princely names, I was ashamed of her, ashamed of the human race. We had to drive those hogs home, 10 miles, and no ladies were ever more fickle-minded or contrary. They could stay in no road, no path. They broke out through the brush on all sides, and flowed away in all directions over rocks and hills in the roughest places they could find, and they must not be struck or roughly accosted. Sandy could not bear to see them treated in ways unbecoming their rank. The troublesomest old sow of the lot had to be called my lady and your highness, like the rest. It is annoying and difficult to scour after. It is annoying and difficult to scour around after hogs in armor. There was one small countess with an iron ring in her nose and hardly any hair on her back that was the devil for perversity. She gave me a race of an hour all she gave me the race of an hour over all sorts of country, and then we were right where we had started from, having made not a rod of real progress. I seized her at last by the tail and brought her along squealing. When I overtook Sandy, she was horrified and said it was in the last degree indelicate to drag a countess by her train. We got the hogs home just after dark, most of them. The Princess Norovens de Mor- the Princess Norovens de Morganore was missing, and two of her ladies in waiting, namely Miss Angela Bohan and the Demoiselle Elaine Curtemains, the former of these two being a young black sow with a white star on her forehead, and the latter a brown one with thin legs and a slight limp in the forward shank on the starboard side, a couple of the tryingest blisters to drive that I ever saw. Also among the missing were several mere baronesses, and I wanted them to stay missing. But no, all that sausage meat had to be found, so servants were sent out with torches to scour the woods and hills to that end. Of course, the whole drove. Of course, the whole drove was housed in the house, and great guns. Well, I never saw anything like it, nor ever heard anything like it, never smelt anything like it. It was like an insurrection in a gasometer. It was like an insurrection in a gasometer. Let's do. I think we'll do one more here. Yeah, the old. And if you're watching this live or on the replay, I always like to hear what book they would like to hear made into an audiobook. Um, right now, I'm working on this one, working on The Wind in the Willows. I'm going to finish Treasure Island, which I'm about halfway done with, and then I will be starting another one, possibly Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. But yeah, if you have any ideas, drop them in the comments. I'm always interested. Okay. Chapter 21 The Pilgrims. When I did get to bed at last, I was unspeakably tired. The stretching out and the relaxing of the long, tense muscles, how luxurious, how delicious. But that was as far as I could get. Sleep was out of the question for the present. The ripping and tearing and squealing of the nobility up and down the halls and corridors was pandemonium come again and kept me broad awake. Being awake, my thoughts were busy, of course, and mainly they busied themselves with Sandy's curious delusion. Here she was, as sane a person as the kingdom could produce, and yet from my point of view, she was acting like a crazy woman. My land, the power of training, of influence, of education. It can bring a body up to believe anything. I had to put myself in Sandy's place to realize that she was not a lunatic. Yes, and put her in mind to demonstrate how easy it is to seem a lunatic to a person who has not been taught as you have been taught. If I had told Sandy I'd seen a wagon, uninfluenced by enchantment, spin along 50 miles an hour, had seen a man, unequipped with magical powers, get into a basket and soar out of sight among the clouds, and had listened without any necromancer's help to the conversation of a person who was several hundred miles away, Sandy would not have merely supposed me to be crazy, she would have thought she knew it. Everybody around her believed in enchantments. Nobody had any doubts. To doubt that a castle could be turned into a sty and its occupants into hogs would have been the same as my doubting among Connecticut people the actuality of the telephone and its wonders, and in both cases would be absolute proof of a diseased mind and unsettled reason. Yes, Sandy was sane, that must be admitted. If I also would be insane to Sandy, I must keep my superstitions about unenchanted and unmiraculous locomotives, balloons, and telephones to myself. Also, I believed that the world was not flat and hadn't pillars under it to support it, nor a canopy over it to turn off a universe of water that occupied all space above. But I was only the person in the But as I was the only person in the kingdom afflicted with such impious and criminal opinions, I recognized it would be good wisdom to keep quiet about this matter too, if I did not wish to be suddenly shunned and forsaken by everybody as a madman. The next morning, Sandy assembled the swine in the dining room and gave them their breakfast, waiting upon them personally and manifesting in every way the deep reverence which the natives of her island, ancient and modern, have always felt for her rank, let its outward casket and the mental and moral contents be what they may. I could have eaten with the hogs if I had birth approaching my I could have eaten with the hogs if I had had birth approaching my lofty official rank, but I hadn't, and so accepted the unavoidable slight and made no complaint. Sandy and I had our breakfast at the second table. The family were not at home. I said, "How many are in the family, Sandy, and where do they keep themselves?" "Family?" "Yes." "Which family, good my lord?" "Why, this family, your own family." "Sooth to say, I understand you not. I have no family." "No family? Why, Sandy, isn't this your home?" "Now how indeed might that be? I have no home." "Well then, whose house is this?" "Ah, wit, you tell, wit you well, I would tell you if I knew myself." "Come, you don't know these people? Then who invited us here?" "None invited us. We but came, that's all." "Why, woman, this is a most extraordinary performance. The effrontery is of beyond admiration. We blandly march into a man's house and cram it full of the only really valuable and cram it full of the really and cram it full of the only really valuable nobility the sun has yet discovered in the earth, and then it turns out that we don't even know the man's name. How did you ever venture to take this extravagant liberty? I supposed, of course, it was your home. What will the man say?" "What will he say? Forsooth, what can he say but give thanks?" "Thanks for what?" Her face was filled with a puzzled surprise. "Verily, thou troublest mine understanding with strange words. Do ye dream that one of his estate is like to have the honor twice in his life to entertain? Do ye do ye dream that one of his estate is like to have the honor twice in his life to entertain company such as we have just brought to grace this house withal?" "Well, no, when you come to that. No, it's an even bet that this is the first time he has ever had a treat like this." "Then let him be thankful, and manifest the same by grateful speech and due humility. He were a dog else, and the heir and ancestor of dogs." To my mind, the situation was uncomfortable. It might become more so. It might be a good idea to muster the hogs and move on. So I said, "The day is wasting, Sandy. It's time to get the nobility together and be moving." "Wherefore, fair sir and boss?" "We want to take them to their home, don't we?" "Ah, list, but list to him. They be of all the regions of the earth. Each must hie to her own home. When you we might do all these journeys in one so brief life as he hath appointed that created life, and thereto death likewise with the help of Adam, who by sin done through persuasion of his helpmeet, she being wrought upon and bewrayed by the beguilements of the great enemy of man, that serpent hight Satan, aforetime consecrated and set apart unto that evil work by overmastering spite and envy begotten in his heart through fell ambitions, and did blight and mildew a nature erst so white and pure, whenso it hove with the shining multitudes, its brethren born in glade and shade of that fair heaven, wherein all such as native be that rich estate and great Scott, my lord. Oh, my lord. Well, you know we haven't got time for this sort of thing. Don't you see? We could distribute these people around the earth in less time than it's going to take you to explain that we can't. We mustn't talk now. We must act. You want to be careful. You mustn't get your mill, you mustn't let your mill get the start of you that way at a time like this. To business now, and sharp's the word. Who is to take the aristocracy home? Even their friends. These'll come for 'em from parts. These'll come for 'em from the far parts of the earth. This was lightning from a clear sky for unexpectedness, and the relief of it was like pardon to a prisoner. She would remain to deliver the goods, of course. Well, then, Sandy, as our enterprise is handsomely and successfully ended, I'll go home and report. And if ever another one, I'm also ready. I'll go with thee. This was recalling the pardon. How? You'll go with me? Why should you? Will I be a traitor to my knight, dost think? That were dishonor. I may not from thee part until in knightly and I may not part from thee until in knightly encounter in the field some overmatching champion shall fairly win and fairly wear me. I were to blame and thought I were to blame and I thought that might ever hap. Elected for the long term, I sighed to myself. I may as well make the best of it. So I spoke up and I said, "All right, let us make a start." While she was gone to cry her farewells over the pork, I gave that whole peerage away to the servants, and I asked them to take a duster and dust around a little where the nobilities had mainly lodged and promenaded, but they considered that it would be hardly worth while and would moreover be a rather grave departure from custom, and therefore likely to make talk. A departure from custom. That settled it. It was a nation capable of committing any crime but that. The servants said they would follow the fashion, a fashion grown sacred through immemorial dis- a fashion grown sacred through immemorial observance. They would scatter fresh rushes in all the rooms and halls, and then the evidence of the aristocratic visitation would be no longer visible. It was a kind of satire on nature, and it was the scientific method, the geologic method. It deposited the history of the family in a stratified record, and the antiquary could dig through it and tell by the remains of each period what changes of diet the family had introduced successfully for 100 years. The first thing we struck that day was a pro- the first thing we struck that day was a procession of pilgrims. It was not going our way, but we joined it, nevertheless. It was hourly being borne in upon me now that if I could govern this country wisely, I must be posted in the details of its life, and not at a second hand, but by personal observation and scrutiny. This company of pilgrims resembled Chaucer's in this, that it had in it a sample of all the upper occupations and professions of the country that it had in it a sample of about all the upper occupations and professions the country could show, and a corresponding variety of costume. There were young men and old men, young women and old women, lively folk and grave folk. They rode upon mules and horses, and there was not a side saddle in the party, for this specialty was to remain unknown in England for 900 years yet. It was a pleasant, friendly, sociable herd, pious, happy, merry, and full of unconscious coarseness and innocent indecencies. What they regarded as the merry tale went the continual round and caused no more embarrassment than it would have caused in the best English society 12 centuries later. Practical jokes worthy of the English wits of the first quarter of the far off 19th century were sprung here and there and yonder along the line and compelled the delightedest applause. And sometimes, when a bright remark was made at one of the procession and started on its travels toward the other, you could note its progress all the way by the sparkling spray of laughter it threw off from its bows as it plowed along, and also by the blushes of the mules in its wake. Sandy knew the goal and purposes of this pilgrimage, and she posted me. She said, they journey to the Valley of Holiness for to be blessed of the godly hermits and drink of the miraculous waters and be cleansed from sin. Where's this watering place? It lieth a 2 day journey hence by the borders of the land that hight the Cuckoo Kingdom. Tell me about it. Is it a celebrated place? Oh, of a truth, yes. There be none more so. Of old time there lived there an abbot and his monks, but like were none in the world more holy than these. For they gave themselves to study of pious books, and spoke not the one to the other, or indeed to any, and ate decayed herbs and naught thereto, and slept hard, and prayed much, and washed never. Also they wore the same garment until it fell from their bodies through age and decay. Right so they came to be known to all the world by reason of these holy austerities, and visited by rich and poor, and reverenced. Proceed. But always there was a lack of water there, whereas upon a time the holy abbot prayed, and for answer a great stream of water clear and for answer a great stream of clear water burst forth by miracle in a desert place. Speaking of a stream of clear water, let me take a little sip. Talking dehydrates you, but you knew that. Let's see. All right. Now were the fickle monks tempted of the fiend, and they wrought with their abbot unceasingly by beggings and beseechings that he would construct a bath. And when he was become a weary and might not resist more, he said, Have ye your will then, and granted that they he said, Have ye your will then, and granted that they asked. Now mark thou what 'tis forsake the ways of purity which he loveth, and wanton with as much Now mark thou what 'tis to forsake the ways of purity the which he loveth, and wanton with such as be worldly and an offence. These monks did enter into the bath, and come thence washed as white as snow. And lo, in that moment his sign appeared in miraculous rebuke, for his insulted waters ceased to flow and utterly vanished away. They fared mildly, Sandy, considering how that kind of crime is regarded in this country. Belike, but it was their first sin, and they had been of perfect life for long, and differing in naught from the angels. Prayers, tears, torturings of the flesh, all was vain to beguile that water to flow again. Even processions, even burnt offerings, even votive candles to the Virgin, did fail, each and every one of them, and all the land did marvel. How odd to find that even this industry has its financial panics, and at times sees its and at times sees it and at times sees its greenbacks languish to zero and everything come to a standstill. Go on, Sandy. And so after a time, after a year and a day, the good abbot made humble surrender and destroyed the bath. And behold, his anger was in that moment appeased, and the waters gushed richly forth again, and even unto this day they have not ceased to flow in that generous measure. Then I take nobody has washed since. He he that would he that would have say it could have he that would have say it could have had his halter free, yes, and swiftly would he need it too. The community has prospered since. Even from that very day, the fame of the miracle went abroad into all lands. From every land came monks to join. They came even as the fishes come in shoals, and the monastery added building to building, and yet others to these, and so spread wide its arms and took 'em in. And nuns came also, and more again, and yet more, and built over against the monastery on the yon side of the vale, and added building to building, until mighty was that nunnery. And all these were friendly unto those, and they joined their loving labors together, and together they built a fair, great foundling asylum midway of the valley between. You spoke of some hermits, Sandy. These have gathered here from the ends of the earth. The hermit thriveth best where there be multitudes of pilgrims. Ye shall not find no hermit of no sort wanton. If any man shall mention a hermit of a kind he thinketh new and not to be found but in some far strange land, let him but scratch among the holes and caves and swamps that line that valley of holiness, and whatsoever be his breed, it skills not he shall find a sample of it there. I closed up along of a burly fellow with a I closed up alongside of a burly fellow with a fat, good-natured face, purposing to make myself agreeable and pick up some further crumbs of fact, but I had hardly more than scraped acquaintance with him when he began eagerly and awkwardly to lead up in the immemorial way to that same old anecdote, the one Sir Dinadan told me, the time I got into trouble with Sir Sagramore, and I was challenged of him on account of it. I excused myself and dropped to the rear of the procession, sad at heart, willing to go hence from this troubled life, this vale of tears, this brief day of broken rest, of clouds and storms, of weary struggle and monotonous defeat, and yet shrinking from the change as remembering how long eternity is and how many have wended thither who know that anecdote. Early in the afternoon we overtook another procession of pilgrims. But in this one there was no merriment, no jokes, no laughter, no playful ways, nor any happy giddiness, whether of youth or age. Yet both were there, both age and youth, gray old men and women, strong men and women of middle age, young husbands, young wives, little boys and girls, and 3 babies at the breast. Even the children were smileless. There was not a face among all these 1/2 people but was cast down and bore that set expression of hopelessness which is bred of long and hard trials and of old acquaintance with despair. They were slaves, chained from their fettered feet and their manacled hands to a sole leather belt around their waists, and all except the children were also linked together in a file 6 feet apart by a single chain which led from collar to collar all down the line. They were on foot and had tramped 300 miles in 18 days upon the cheapest odds and ends of food and stingy rations of that. They had slept in these chains every night, bundled together like swine. They had upon their bodies some poor rags, but they could not be said to be clothed. Their irons had chafed the skin from their ankles and made sores which were ulcerated and wormy. Their naked feet were torn, and none walked without a limp. Originally, there had been 100 of these unfortunates, but about half of them had been sold on the trip. The trader in charge of them rode a horse and carried a whip with a short handle and a long, heavy lash divided into several knotted tails at the end. With this whip he cut the shoulders of any that tottered from weariness and pain, and straightened them up. He did not speak. The whip conveyed his desire without that. None of these poor creatures looked up as we rode along. None of these poor creatures looked up as we rode along by. They showed no consciousness of our presence, and they made no sound but one. That was the dull and awful clank of their chains from end to end of the long file, as 43 burdened feet rose and fell in unison. The file moved in a cloud of its own making. All these faces were gray with a coating of dust. One has seen the like. One has seen the like of this coating upon furniture in unoccupied houses, and has written his idle thought in it with his finger. I was reminded of this when I noticed the faces of some of those women, young mothers carrying babes that were near to death and freedom, how something in their hearts was written in the dust upon their faces, plain to see, and Lord, how plain to read, for it was the track of tears. One of these young mothers was but a girl, and it hurt me to the heart to read that writing, and reflect that it was come up out of the breast of such a child, a breast that ought not to know trouble yet, but only the gladness of the morning of life, and no doubt. She reeled just then, giddy with fatigue, and down came the lash and flicked a flake of skin from her naked shoulder. It stung me as if I had been hit instead. The master halted the file and jumped from his horse. He stormed and swore at this girl, and she and said she had made annoyance enough with her laziness, and as this was the last chance he could have, he would settle the account now. She dropped on her knees and put up her hands and began to beg and cry and implore in a passion of terror, but the master gave no attention. He snatched the child from her, and then made the men slaves who were chained before her and behind her throw her on the ground and hold her there, and then he laid on with his lash like a madman till her back was flayed. One of the men who was holding her turned away his face, and for this humanity he was reviled and flogged. All our pilgrims looked all our pilgrims looked on and commented on the expert way which he handled the whip. There was too much hardened They were too much hardened by lifelong, everyday familiarity with slavery to notice that there was anything else in the exhibition that invited comment. That was what slavery could do, in the way of ossifying what one may call the superior lobe of human feeling. For these pilgrims were kind-hearted people, and they could not have allowed that man to treat a horse like that. I wanted to stop the whole thing and set the slaves free, but that would not do. I must not interfere too much and get myself a name for riding over the country's laws and the citizens' rights roughshod. If I lived and prospered, I would be the death of slavery. That I was resolved upon. But I would try to fix it so that when I but I would try to fix it so that when I became its executioner, it should be by command of the nation. Just here was the wayside shop of a smith, and now arrived a landed proprietor who had brought this girl a few miles back. And now arrived a landed proprietor who had bought this girl a few miles back, deliverable here where her irons could be taken off. They were removed. Then there was a squabble between the gentleman and the dealer as who should pay the blacksmith. The moment the girl was delivered from her The moment the girl was delivered from her irons, she flung herself, all tears and frantic sobbings, into the arms of the slave who had turned away his face when she was whipped. She strained her to his breast and smothered her face and the child with kisses and washed them with the rain of his tears. I suspected. I inquired. Yes, I was right. It was husband and wife. They had to be torn apart by force. The girl had to be dragged away, and she struggled and fought and shrieked like one gone mad, till a turn of the road hid her from sight. And even after that, we could still make out the fading plaint of those receding shrieks. And the husband and father, with his wife and child gone, never to be seen again by him in life. Uh, and the husband and father, with his wife and child gone, never to be seen by him again in life. Well, the look of him one might not bear at all, and so I turned away, and I knew I should never get this picture out of my mind again, and there it is to this day to wring my heartstrings whenever I think of it. We put up at the inn in a village just at nightfall, and when I rose next morning and looked abroad, I was ware of a knight came riding along in the glory. I was I was where a knight came riding in the golden glory of the new day, and recognized him for a knight of mine. Sir Ozana de la Cure Hardy. He was in a gentleman's furnishing line, and his missionary specialty was plug hats. He was clothed all in steel, in the beautifulest armor of the time, up to where his helmet ought to have been, but he hadn't any helmet. He wore a shiny stovepipe hat, and was ridiculous a spectacle as and was as ridiculous a spectacle as one might and was as ridiculous a spectacle as one might want to see. It was another of my surreptitious schemes for extinguishing knighthood by making it grotesque and absurd. Sir Ozana's saddle was hung about with leather hat boxes, and every time he overcame a wandering knight, he swore him into my service and fitted him with a plug and made him wear it. I dressed and ran down to welcome Sir Ozana and to get his news. How's trade? I asked. You'll note I have but these 4 left, yet there were 16 when as I got from Camelot. Why, you have certainly done nobly, Sir Ozana. Where have you been foraging of late? I am but now come from I am but now come from the Valley of Holiness, please you, sir. I'm pointed for that place myself. Is there anything stirring in the monkery more than common? By the by the mass ye may not question it. Give him good feed, boy, and stint it not, and thou valuest thy crown. So get ye lightly to the stable, and do even as I bid. Sir, it's parlous news I bring, and be these pilgrims, then ye may not do better, good folk, than gather and hear the tale I have to tell, sith it concerneth you, for as much as you go to find that for as much as you go to find that you will not find, and seek that which will seek in vain, my life being hostage for my word, and my word and message being these, namely, that a hap has happened whereof the like has not been seen no more but once these 200 years, which was the first and last time that said misfortune strake the Holy Valley in that form by commandment of the Most High, whereunto my reasons just and causes thereunto contributing, wherein the miraculous fount hath ceased to flow. This shout burst from my 20 pilgrim mouths at once. Ye say well, good people, I was verging on it even when ye spake. Has somebody been washing again? Nay, it's been suspected, but none believe it. It is thought to be some other sin, but none wit what. How are they feeling about the calamity? None may describe it in words. The fount is in these 9 days dry. The prayers that did begin then, and the lamentations in sackcloth and ashes, and the holy processions, none of these have ceased, nor none of these have ceased nor night nor day, and so the monks and nuns and the foundlings be all exhausted, and do hang up prayers writ upon parchment, sith that no strength is left to man to lift up voice, they sent they sent for thee, Sir Boss, to try magic and enchantments. And if you could not come, then was the messenger to fetch Merlin, and he's there all excuse me, and he's there these 3 days now, and saith he'll fetch that water through he burst the globe, and saith he'll fetch that water through he burst the globe and wreck its kingdoms to accomplish it. And right bravely doth he work his magic, and call upon his hellions to hie them hither and help, but not a whiff of moisture hath he started yet, even so much as might qualify as mist upon a copper mirror, and ye count not the barrel of sweat he sweateth betwixt sun and ye count not the barrel of sweat he sweateth betwixt sun and sun over the dire labors of his task. And if ye breakfast was ready. And as soon as it was over, I showed Sir Ozana these words which I had written on the inside of his hat. Chemical Department, Laboratory Extension, Section G, PXXP. Send 2 of the first size, 2 of number 3, and 6 of number 4, together with the proper complimentary details, and 2 of my trained assistants. And I said, now get you to Camelot as fast as you can fly, brave knight, and show the writing to Clarence, and tell him to have these required matters in the Valley of Holiness with all possible dispatch. I will well, Sir Boss. And he was off. All right, that was chapter 21. So we've done chapter 20 and chapter 21. And that was a good little read there. So whether you're live or watching the replay, thank you very much for watching. And I will be doing this again daily for the month of January, hopefully. Probably a couple times a day, and one being in the day, one in the evening. That's kind of my goal. And yeah, thank you very much. Hope you subscribe, like the video, that kind of thing, and we'll see you very soon.